The aftermath of that slap wasn't just about Judge Reed's stinging cheek. It was about the stinging conscience of a city. It was a wake-up call to the insidious power of institutional inertia, the quiet complicity that allows a few bad actors to corrupt an entire system. For every one of us who's ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or told that our pain isn't significant enough to disrupt the status quo, Judge Reed's unyielding resolve was a stark, powerful lesson. True change begins not with a whisper, but with a roar. And sometimes that roar needs a public stage. By 9 o'clock IED, the Sterling Heights courthouse felt like a pressure cooker. Reporters lingered in corridors, their hushed whispers mingling with the frantic rustling of legal papers. Court clerks exchanged wide-eyed glances in doorways. Attorneys, usually so confident, now avoided eye contact, sensing the seismic shift in the building's very foundation. Everyone felt it. Something big was unraveling. Judge Evelyn Reed stepped into the main courtroom, flanked by her steadfast bailiff, Marcus, and the no-nonsense internal affairs agent, Lena Kim. She was not in her robe. She wasn't presiding today. Today, she was fighting. The courtroom buzzed as she entered, the whispers dying fast. At the far end, Assistant District Attorney Thomas Hayes stood beside a representative from the State Ethics Board, a young white man in a tailored gray suit who looked like he hadn't blinked since law school. His name tag read Elliot Parrish, but his expression clearly said, "Hatchet Man." "Judge Reed?" Parrish greeted with a tight smile. "We've received your request for a public hearing regarding your recusal. I am here to clarify it and to make it part of the public record. And I am here to ensure that happens, clearly and unequivocally." Judge Reed replied, her voice firm. They sat, the press watching closely from the back rows. "I reviewed the argument filed by the DA's office," Judge Reed began, her gaze sweeping across the room, "claiming that I am emotionally compromised and potentially biased due to the incident involving Officer Brock." ADA Hayes didn't flinch. "Our concern is purely procedural. You are the victim of an alleged crime committed by the defendant. Under state statute, a judge may recuse themselves to preserve impartiality." "I am fully aware of the statute, Mr. Hayes," Judge Reed interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "which is precisely why I am choosing to step down from the Brock arraignment. Not because I am compromised, but because I refuse to let this case be quietly diluted." She turned, her eyes locking with a young black female journalist in the front row, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "I am requesting that the Brock case be elevated to special review status. I am also formally requesting that an independent federal monitor be assigned to investigate the handling of previous cases involving Officer Brock and his direct collaborators." A murmur swept through the room, growing louder. Ada Hayes leaned forward, his face paling slightly. "Judge, I caution you, this isn't the forum to suggest conspiracy." "I'm not suggesting it, Mr. Hayes," Judge Reed said, her voice cold. "I'm proving it." She handed a file to Agent Lena Kim, who placed it on the table between them and opened it for the record. Inside, 3 complaints, 5 sealed memos, 2 missing body cam logs, and a court transcript from a juvenile trial in 2018. Each one bore Thomas Hayes' signature. "You declined to prosecute Brock in 5 separate cases, Mr. Hayes," Judge Reed stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "Despite documented excessive force and contradictory statements under oath, and in every one of those cases the defense was pressured into accepting plea deals, many involving young black defendants without legal representation." Hayes went utterly pale but said nothing. He had walked right into the trap. Lena Kim placed a second document on the table. "And here's a wire transfer, Mr. Parrish," she said coolly, addressing the Ethics Board representative. "It shows a $15,000 0-cents contribution to the state judicial endowment, from an entity tied to the Sterling Heights Police Benevolent Fund. That money was earmarked for a scholarship program, but half of it was rerouted into a legal defense fund, used last year for Officer Brock. Parrish swallowed hard. That's not relevant to the ethics motion, he stammered, clearly out of his depth. It is, if it shows collusion, Judge Reed said. If public funds are being funneled into legal shields for corrupt officers, it's more than relevant. It's a pattern, and I'm naming it now. Then she turned toward Ada Hayes, her gaze piercing. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, who protected Brock when the body cam footage disappeared in 2019? The one where a minor ended up in the hospital? Hayes opened his mouth, then closed it, utterly speechless. Judge Reed waited. Agent Lena Kim spoke instead. We believe the footage wasn't lost. It was redirected. Judge Reed raised an eyebrow. To where? Lena Kim slid over a slip of paper. To an external server owned by a private security contractor based in Atlanta. That contractor has a retainer agreement with the Sterling Heights mayor's office. And who approved that contract? Judge Reed looked at Hayes. He said nothing. Lena Kim delivered the final, devastating blow. You did! The room erupted. Shouts, flashing cameras, people standing to whisper to each other. Hayes stood up suddenly, his chair screeching behind him. This is character assassination, he cried. This is exposure, Judge Reed replied, her voice resonating through the chaos. And it's long overdue. Parrish, from the ethics board, rose, visibly shaken. I need time to process this information. You'll have it, Judge Reed said, but let the record reflect that I am voluntarily recusing myself to protect the process. Not because I was pressured, not because I was intimidated, and not because I will be silent. Then she turned to the reporters, her voice like a bell through the room. This city has protected a system of unchecked power for far too long. Today is not about a slap. It's about what happens when someone believes they can act without consequence because every layer above them is willing to look the other way. She looked directly at Hayes, who now seemed to be shrinking into himself. Those layers are crumbling. Hayes left the courtroom in a blur of whispered phone calls and sweat. Parrish followed. Judge Reed turned to Lena Kim and Marcus, exhaling slowly. You think they'll come after you? Marcus asked quietly. Judge Reed didn't hesitate. They already have. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You need to stop. Just that. No name, no threat. Just 5 chilling words. She showed the screen to Lena Kim. Lena Kim read it, then said, Good. That means we're hitting nerves. Judge Reed looked out the window of the courtroom toward the line of city buildings. The offices, the rooftops, hiding secrets. She wasn't just trying to convict a cop anymore. She was trying to dismantle a machine. And somewhere in that machine, someone very powerful was watching. This is the unsettling truth of deep-rooted corruption. It's rarely about one bad actor. It's a complex web, woven with threads of power, money, and complicity, where good people are tempted, pressured, or simply silenced. And the deeper you dig, the more unsettling the discoveries become. Officer Brock was just the entry point. The real battle was against the unseen architects of injustice. And as we're about to find out, those architects had already claimed a life in their desperate attempts to keep their secrets buried. The lines of corruption stretch far beyond the courthouse and into the grave. The cell was colder than Officer Brock expected. Not physically, though the concrete bench did little to soften the discomfort, but spiritually. This was a place designed to hollow a man out. No badge, no gun, no shield. Just 4 gray walls and the growing awareness that the world outside them had changed while he sat still. Brock stared at his hands. Strong hands. The same ones that had once pulled a drug dealer off a porch in North Sterling Heights. Broken up fights behind warehouses. Testified in court with an unshakable voice. Hands that used to command respect, or at least fear. Now they trembled slightly. The guard outside hadn't spoken in over an hour. No friendly nods, no casual remarks. Just a tight jaw and eyes that avoided his. Even in here, he was alone. Brock stood suddenly, pacing the tiny space like a caged dog. He'd spent his whole career believing he couldn't be touched, that no matter how messy things got, someone higher up would always clean it up, and usually they did, but this time, he slammed his fist against the wall. Not hard enough to break bone, just hard enough to remember he still had blood pumping through his veins. Suddenly the lock clicked. The door opened slightly. A man in a gray suit entered. Older. Bald. Cold. Brock tensed. "Who the hell are you?" The man shut the door behind him, offering no name, just a file folder, which he tossed onto the bench. "Your lifeline," he said, "or your anchor." Brock scowled. "I don't play cryptic." "Then I'll be clear," the man replied. "I represent interests that are deeply concerned with what Judge Reed is stirring up. You've been useful in the past, Sergeant, but now you're a liability." Brock bristled. "A liability? I gave everything to this department." "Which is why they haven't thrown you to the wolves yet," the man said coolly. "But understand this. If you continue to sit here and let her control the narrative, we will not protect you." Brock narrowed his eyes. "Then what do you want me to do?" The man smiled slightly. "Remind them who you are." He opened the folder. Inside were pages of notes on Judge Evelyn Reed. Her address, family history, old photographs. One even showed her with her late husband, a former attorney now deceased. Brock's pulse ticked up. "This is surveillance. This, the man said, is leverage." Brock stepped back. "Are you out of your damn mind? You want me to threaten a judge?" "No," the man said. "We want you to warn her, subtly. She's too bold right now. She needs to remember that power doesn't come from robes or courtrooms. It comes from fear. You know how to deliver that." Brock stared at him. This wasn't a rescue. It was a dare. "If I do this," he said, "what do I get?" "A lifeline," the man said. "One that keeps you out of federal prison. One that puts you on a private security payroll for a firm that never asks questions. Or," he tapped the wall gently, "you rot here, forgotten." Then he left, just as silently as he'd come. Brock stared at the file for a long time. Then he picked it up. Across town, Judge Reed walked through the halls of the courthouse like a woman heading into a storm, her coat draped over her shoulders, her heels echoing sharply. The press was back in full force. Some offered nods, others whispered behind raised phones. Inside her chambers, Marcus was already waiting. "You didn't answer my text," he said. "I needed air," she replied. "You also have 6 voicemails, 3 from the mayor's office, 2 from the ethics board, and 1 from your sister." Judge Reed raised an eyebrow. "My sister?" "She saw you on the news," Marcus said. "Said you looked taller." Judge Reed allowed a half smile, but the weight hadn't lifted. She sat behind her desk, scanning the newest file from Lena Kim, updates on ADA Thomas Hayes, and a redacted name linked to a suspicious private contract. Before she could fully process it, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number, 1 new text message. She opened it. "Nice house in Mount Pleasant. Does your nephew still bike home alone from school?" Judge Reed froze. Her hand went cold around the phone. The words blurred slightly, but the message was razor sharp. She stood, walked to the door, and locked it. Marcus noticed. "What's wrong?" She handed him the phone. He read it, his eyes darkening instantly. "That son of a—" "Don't say it," Judge Reed said. She walked to the window and stared out. Somewhere someone was trying to remind her of the rules of how this game had always been played, of how women like her were meant to stay quiet or be made to regret it. "I need a name," she said. "Whoever sent that message." Marcus nodded. "I'll get it." "And Marcus?" "I want my nephew pulled from school, quietly. And I want someone I trust to watch my sister's house." Marcus didn't argue. He just picked up the phone and started dialing. That night, Officer Brock was moved, not released, not transferred officially, just relocated. No paperwork, no explanation. He walked through the back corridors of the precinct like a man being smuggled through enemy territory. He was handed a burner phone, an unregistered vehicle, and a name: Evelyn Reed. The man from earlier appeared again, leaning into the car window. "One warning, clean, subtle. You don't touch her. You don't even see her. You just make her feel it." Brock started the engine. "I've been making people feel things my whole life," he muttered, and then he disappeared into the Sterling Heights night. At the courthouse the next morning, Judge Reed received a package. No return address, no label. Inside, a photograph of her nephew, taken 2 days ago, walking home from school. On the back, scribbled in jagged block letters, "Stay in your lane." Judge Reed stood still for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone. "Get me the U.S. Marshal's office." Because whoever had just knocked on her door, they were about to find out what it looked like when a judge stopped playing by the rules and started writing new ones. This wasn't just a slap anymore. It was a declaration of war. The hidden forces that had protected Officer Brock for decades were now coming for Judge Reed's family, forcing her to confront a reality far more terrifying than a public scandal. This escalation, this crossing of an unseen line, meant only one thing. There was no turning back. And the next battle wouldn't be in a courtroom, but in the shadows, where the real strings of power were pulled. The Federal Building in downtown Sterling Heights was built like a fortress, bland from the outside, cold on the inside, and secured down to the last screw. That morning, Judge Evelyn Reed sat across from 3 U.S. Marshals and 2 Department of Justice (DOJ) officials, each with files open and pens poised. Her posture was calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within. She slid the photograph across the polished table. A candid shot of her nephew, backpack swinging, walking home from school. "My nephew," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands that only she could feel. "Taken 2 days ago, without his knowledge. Sent to me this morning in an unmarked envelope, with a warning." She paused, her gaze meeting the eyes of the tall, gray-haired Marshal Mercer. "The man behind it, Travis Brock, or someone acting directly in his interest. Brock doesn't send messages like this unless someone gives him the green light." Marshal Mercer examined the photo without expression. "You're certain it's him?" "I'm certain it came from someone acting in his interest," Judge Reed reiterated, her voice unwavering. "Brock doesn't send messages like this unless someone gives him the green light." "What exactly are you asking us for, Judge?" asked Frances Kwan, a sharp DOJ representative. Judge Reed leaned forward, folding her hands. "I want full protection for my family. I want Brock placed under federal custody by the end of the day. And I want an emergency judicial order freezing every case tied to his testimony for independent review." Frances Kwan raised an eyebrow. "That's going to shake Sterling Heights courts for months." Judge Reed met her gaze without blinking, then let them shake. No one argued. Within an hour, a team of marshals was en route to Brock's last known location, and Judge Reed was back at the courthouse, not as a judge behind the bench, but as a force walking its halls like a storm system with a purpose. She met Agent Lena Kim outside the district records room. Lena Kim was holding a new folder, her expression grim. "We traced the burner phone," Lena Kim said. "Brock used it twice last night. Once to a number registered under a shell company in Atlanta. That company shares office space with a lobbying firm tied to your mayor's re-election campaign." Judge Reed exhaled sharply. "So, the rot goes beyond the courts." Lena Kim nodded grimly. "Way beyond." Judge Reed's voice dropped to a whisper. "You said the name of the shell company was flagged before?" Lena Kim's lips pressed tight. "Twice. First in a corruption probe 3 years ago. Buried without action. And the second? 6 weeks ago in a financial audit request made by a local journalist. Her name was Sophia Lewis. She disappeared 2 days later. Body was found in her car. Ruled an overdose." Judge Reed's jaw tightened, a cold fury building in her chest. Not the kind that made you scream, but the kind that made you plan. "Let me guess. She didn't have a history of drug use?" "Nope. She had a history of exposing corrupt officials." Judge Reed stared down the hallway. "Find me everything that journalist was working on. Every source. Every file. If there's a thread she was pulling on, we're going to rip it out of the wall." Lena Kim hesitated. "Judge, this may go far beyond Brock." Judge Reed turned, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'm counting on it." Across the city, Officer Brock's knuckles were white against the steering wheel of his borrowed sedan. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. His phone buzzed again and again from unknown numbers, each one barking instructions, warnings, or threats. Some from handlers, others from old friends suddenly turning cold. He was running out of time. He'd thought the photograph would rattle her, remind her she didn't belong in the war she'd started, but instead it had woken something in her. And now he was the one being hunted. He pulled into a parking garage downtown, half empty and echoing. From the trunk, he pulled a duffel bag, cash, a second burner, a Glock he wasn't supposed to have. He wasn't going down without a fight. But before he could make it to the stairwell, a voice behind him echoed off the concrete. "Sergeant, Brock." He turned fast, gun halfway drawn. 4 U.S. Marshals stepped from the shadows, guns already raised. "Put it down, Brock." He froze. For the first time there was no bluff left to play. No one coming to rescue him. No deal waiting in the back room. Brock dropped the bag, then the gun. Then his knees hit the concrete with a dull, final sound. Back at the courthouse, Judge Reed received the alert at 3:14 p.m. Brock in federal custody, unarmed, arrested without incident. She didn't smile. There was no victory in this, only confirmation. She was already in a meeting with Lena Kim, Marcus, and now DOJ Rep Francis Kwan, who had returned with reinforcements and a briefcase full of newly unsealed documents. "We've reopened the Sophia Lewis file," Francis Kwan said. "Initial autopsy was inconclusive, but the coroner's report was altered after submission. Whoever changed it, they did it from a private login that no longer exists on record." Judge Reed's voice was barely above a whisper. "Somebody's been erasing truth like it's pencil." "Not anymore," Francis Kwan said. "We've initiated a joint task force. Internal Affairs, federal investigators, and an external judicial review board." "Brock's not talking yet," Lena Kim added, "but he will." Judge Reed looked down at the files in front of her. The names, the cases, the patterns. A map of injustice, a blueprint of decay, and now, finally, a trail of accountability. She stood, walked to the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip below the city's edge. It painted the courthouse steps gold. She saw people there, Reporters, protesters, survivors. Some held signs with Brock's name. Others held pictures of loved ones whose cases had never found justice. Marcus stepped beside her. "You did it," he said softly. "No," she replied. "I just turned on the light. The roaches scattered themselves." He smiled faintly. "What now?" She exhaled deeply. "Now we see how deep the tunnel goes." And deep it would go, because Brock wasn't the only one facing indictment. And Evelyn Reed? She wasn't done burning the house down. This was the tipping point, the moment the fuse, lit by a single defiant slap, reached the explosive core of corruption. It was clear now. There was no turning back for anyone involved. The shadows were being peeled back, one by one, revealing the true faces of power and complicity. The press conference was set for 10 o'clock AIE, but the front steps of the Sterling Heights courthouse were already packed by 9:30. Local reporters jostled with national correspondents. Legal observers mingled with survivors of police brutality, and citizens held signs that read, "Justice for all" or "Justice for none." Judge Evelyn Reed stood at the edge of the window in her chambers, watching it unfold. She wore black, not her robes, but a fitted blazer over a deep charcoal blouse. No bench today, no barrier. She would face them standing, as a citizen and as a fighter. "Brock's been moved to a secure facility," Agent Lena Kim said from behind her. "And he's talking." Judge Reed turned. "To whom?" "Dooge agents. He's naming names." Lena Kim handed her a sheet. "How many?" 12, Lena Kim replied. 7 police officers, 2 ADA prosecutors, 1 retired captain, 1 city council member, and 1, shock that made Judge Reed's throat tighten, Judge Harrison Caldwell. Judge Harrison Caldwell, a man she'd clerked under as a law student, a man who'd mentored her, guided her, called her the future of Sterling Heights law. She stared at his name as if it had been burned into her desk. "No," she whispered. "Ben." Marcus leaned over her shoulder, jaw clenched. "That man swore you in." Lena Kim was gentle but direct. He also signed off on at least 3 questionable case dismissals tied to Brock. One of them involved a civil rights complaint that disappeared before it hit a hearing. Judge Reed's hands balled into fists. "This goes deeper than crooked cops," she said. "This is institutional, judicial, political, generational." Lena Kim nodded. "The kind of network that survives by feeding off silence." "Then we make noise," Judge Reed said, "starting now." Outside, the cameras flashed as Judge Reed stepped up to the podium. The crowd hushed instantly. She looked out over the city, not just with resolve, but with heartbreak. "I became a judge because I believed in the promise of justice," she began. "But promises mean nothing if they are not kept. Today, I stand not just as a member of the court, but as a witness to what has been broken and what must be rebuilt." She paused, lifting the folder in her hand. "This document contains the names of 12 individuals who over the last decade colluded to protect one another while abusing their authority. Some are police officers, some are attorneys. One is a sitting judge." Gasps. Shutters clicked. Phones went up. "I have submitted this list to federal investigators. I will not read them aloud here. Not because I fear backlash, but because I believe in due process, something many of them denied to others." Her voice sharpened. "We are not here because of one man's slap. We are here because of what that slap revealed, a system built on fear, silence, and loyalty to everything but the truth." From the back, someone yelled, "We believe you, Judge Reed!" Applause erupted, scattered at first, then growing louder. Marcus stood just to her left, stone-faced but proud. Lena Kim lingered near the crowd, her eyes scanning rooftops, her allies alert for more than applause. Because now that the names were public, Judge Reed had painted a target on her back, and someone was already taking aim. That evening, while the courthouse emptied and the streets calmed, Judge Reed returned to her chambers, exhausted but still burning. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail. Blocked number. She pressed play. Evelyn. Came a voice she hadn't heard in years. Smooth, precise, refined, like a scalpel. It was Judge Harrison Caldwell. I imagine by now you've seen my name on one of those lists. And I imagine you're feeling betrayed. But before you commit to the destruction of everything we've built, understand this. Some structures survive because they must. You take us all down, you take down the last bit of order this city has left. A pause. You don't want chaos, Evelyn. You don't want blood. Walk away while you still have that option. Or you won't just lose your seat, you'll lose everything. Click. The silence afterward was heavier than the threat. Marcus walked in moments later. Did I just see a black SUV pull away from the loading dock? Judge Reed looked at him. Caldwell just called me. Marcus's face hardened. He's threatening you. No, she replied. He warned me. Which is worse? He crossed his arms. You're not backing down. She looked him straight in the eye. Not a chance. By midnight it began. The first smear article appeared online. Judge Reed accused of improper conduct during 2009 case. No source, no evidence, just vague accusations and manufactured outrage. Then came the bots, flooding social media with hashtags like activist judge and Reed must resign. Within hours, news outlets received anonymous tips about Judge Reed's ties to radical organization. Photos surfaced. Judge Reed in college, fist raised at a protest. The caption twisted it into something darker. Even her nephew's school received a call from a concerned citizen asking whether the boy was being indoctrinated. They weren't just coming after her name. They were coming after her bloodline. Judge Reed sat in the dark, staring at the headlines, the screenshots, the digital poison. They're going to try to discredit everything, Marcus said, arms crossed at the door. Burn your credibility, your legacy. Judge Reed nodded slowly. Then we changed the rules. She stood, pulled open her drawer, and handed Marcus a small black binder. What's this? Everything I've never said out loud, about Caldwell, about cases that didn't sit right, about whispers I heard in back hallways and country club dinners. You wrote it all down? Marcus asked, eyes widening as he flipped through the pages. Of course I did, she said. I'm a judge. Documentation is survival. Evelyn, Marcus whispered, this isn't just a defense. This is a nuclear weapon. I'm not just trying to survive anymore, she said softly. I'm going to make sure they can never hide again. As the city slept, files were duplicated, evidence was archived, allies were contacted. And in a quiet office overlooking Sterling Heights, Judge Evelyn Reed prepared for the final trial. Not of a man, but of the very machine that made men like him possible. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse downtown was standing room only. Cameras lined the halls. Protesters and supporters packed the plaza. A perimeter of U.S. Marshals surrounded the building. Inside, the air was thick, not just with anticipation, but with history. Judge Evelyn Reed sat in the front row, not on the bench, not behind the gavel, but as a witness, as a citizen. On trial, Travis Brock. Charges: assault of a federal judge, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to suppress evidence, witness intimidation, and perjury. 5 felony counts. But Brock wasn't the only one in court. Behind closed doors, indictments had already been unsealed. ADA Thomas Hayes had resigned in disgrace and was negotiating a plea. Judge Harrison Caldwell was suspended pending judicial investigation. 2 precinct captains had been fired. 3 officers had turned state's evidence. And the man who had approached Brock in the cell, the unnamed handler, the broker of threats, had vanished. The web had begun to unravel. And Judge Reed, she had lit the match. The prosecutor rose first. Your Honor, the state calls Judge Evelyn Reed to the stand. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Reed stood, walked calmly toward the witness box, and took her oath. She sat, composed, clear. The prosecutor approached. Judge Reed, what happened? On the morning of April 11th. Her voice rang through the courtroom, not loud, but grounded, immovable. I was struck in the face by a man who believed I didn't belong. The prosecutor nodded. And what did that moment mean to you? Judge Reed paused. It meant that the system I'd spent my life serving was no longer capable of protecting the people who served it. That respect, law, and truth had become negotiable, reserved only for those who fit a certain mold. She looked across the courtroom, not at Brock, but at the jury. But it also meant something else. That silence could no longer protect us. That if I didn't stand up, others would stay down. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Brock's lawyer approached. Young, tense, overmatched. He fumbled through cross-examination. Judge Reed, do you think you're above the law? Judge Reed looked at him as if he were a student asking why the sky was blue. No, I think I'm beneath it, like everyone else. That's the point. Laughter murmured through the crowd. The judge banged his gavel once. The defense attorney tried again. Do you admit that you brought personal bias into this investigation? I brought truth, Judge Reed said. And if that truth is uncomfortable, that's not bias. That's justice doing its job. The jury watched her, unblinking. Brock watched her too. For the first time, not with rage, but with the hollow look of a man who finally knew it was over. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing would follow, but Brock was no longer the headline. The ripple effect had turned into a wave. A week later, a statewide investigation was launched into judicial misconduct. Over 140 past convictions were placed under review. A civil rights commission began auditing officer complaint procedures. The governor called for a bipartisan reform task force, and the Sterling Heights Police Department under full federal oversight. This was the long-awaited reckoning. Not a quick fix, but a deep systemic purge. It showed that when one person dares to speak truth to power and refuses to back down, the echoes can resonate far beyond a single courtroom, shattering years of silence and paving the way for real, lasting change. But what happens after the battle is won? Does the warrior simply fade away, or does the fight transform into something new? The next and final chapter will explore just that. It was a rainy Thursday when Judge Evelyn Reed returned to the same courtroom where it all began. The slap still echoed in that space, if only in memory, but everything else had changed. She stood alone before the bench, staring at the chair she had once ruled from, her reflection shimmering in the polished wood. Marcus walked in behind her, his coat still damp from the rain. "They want to name the judicial conference room after you," he said. Judge Reed raised an eyebrow, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "I haven't died, exactly." Marcus smirked. "It's weird." She smiled faintly, then turned serious. "Are the reforms going to stick?" Marcus shrugged, a gesture of cautious optimism. "Some will. Others will take time." Judge Reed nodded. "That's what they never tell you about justice. It's not a moment. It's erosion and rebuilding. He hesitated. You sure you want to do this? She turned. I have to. That afternoon, Judge Reed stood before the State Judiciary Review Board. Flashes went off. Mics clicked on. She cleared her throat. I am submitting my resignation. Gasps. I believe in the law. I believe in its power to protect, to punish, and to heal. But I also believe that institutions must be rebuilt by new hands. I lit a fire. It is not for me to stand in its glow. One of the board members stood. Judge Reed, your actions have inspired a movement. You could remain and lead that change. Judge Reed smiled sadly. Change doesn't need a monument. It needs momentum. She turned to leave, but not before saying one last thing. Make sure the next woman who wears this robe doesn't have to fight the way I did just to be heard. 2 months later, she returned to her family's house in Mount Pleasant. The quiet was strange, the silence no longer threatening but cleansing. Her nephew biked in from school, his backpack swinging behind him. He saw her on the porch, dropped his bike, and ran up the steps. Auntie Evelyn, he shouted. She caught him in a hug, strong and long and silent. I saw you on TV, he said into her shoulder. Then she said, Hey, I know, you made them listen. She pulled back and looked him in the eyes. I made them look. Listening. That's still up to them. He nodded solemnly, with the kind of understanding kids aren't supposed to have, but often do. They sat on the porch as the sun began to set. The city still buzzed beyond the hills, but here it was calm. A breeze moved through the trees. Judge Reed closed her eyes and exhaled. Not in surrender, but in peace. This isn't just a courtroom drama. It's a mirror held up to society. The story of a corrupt cop slapping the wrong judge is about power, prejudice, and the price of silence. But more than that, it's about the courage to stand when others kneel, to speak truth when the world demands your quiet. Judge Evelyn Reed represents something we rarely see portrayed honestly. A woman of integrity who rises not through revenge, but through justice. She reminds us that no matter how strong the system may seem, it is built by people, and it can be changed by people, especially by those who've lived long enough to know what's truly worth fighting for. For older generations, this story hits a deeper nerve. You've seen the decades pass. You've witnessed injustice recycled in new forms. And yet, hope remains when people like Judge Reed refuse to back down. Her stand isn't just for herself. It's for the next generation. For her nephew, for the forgotten, for all of us. So if this story moved you, don't let it stop here. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think, made you feel, then please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the incredible human spirit. Your support helps us amplify these crucial stories. Thank you for listening, because real justice isn't loud, but when it shows up, it echoes for generations.